when Staff Sergeant Alexis Rivera gripped the controls of the $2.8 billion B-22 Phantom stealth bomber as enemy missiles screamed toward her at Mach 3. The command center at Thornfield Air Base fell into stunned silence. The woman they had dismissed as just a grease monkey was about to attempt the most impossible deep strike mission in military history, one that had already claimed the lives of 3 of the Air Force's most elite pilots. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mission parameters were beyond insane. Penetrate 400 miles into heavily defended enemy territory, destroy a nuclear weapons facility hidden beneath a mountain, and return home through a gauntlet of surface-to-air missiles that had turned the night sky into a deadly light show. Every computer simulation had ended in failure. Every tactical analysis had concluded the mission was suicide. Yet here was Rivera, the 34-year-old maintenance specialist who spent her days elbow-deep in engine grease, preparing to fly into hell itself. Before we dive into this incredible story, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if this tale of hidden courage inspires you. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we have something even more extraordinary waiting for you. The crimson warning lights bathed the cockpit of Shadow 7 in an otherworldly glow as Rivera's hands moved across controls that she wasn't supposed to understand, much less master. Below her, the mountainous terrain of the contested Valdres region stretched endlessly, its peaks shrouded in the kind of darkness that had swallowed 3 previous attempts at this mission. The enemy's integrated air defense network was the most sophisticated on Earth, a web of radar installations, missile batteries, and interceptor aircraft that had earned the nickname the Iron Curtain among military planners. What made this moment even more surreal was that just 48 hours earlier, Rivera had been nobody special. She was the quiet mechanic in Hangar Delta 7 who arrived before dawn and left after sunset, her flight suit stained with hydraulic fluid and her hands permanently marked by years of working on aircraft engines. Her personnel jacket was thin basic. Technical training, steady performance evaluations, and a work ethic that kept multi-billion-dollar war machines in perfect flying condition. Nothing in her official record suggested she possessed the skills to pilot the most advanced aircraft ever built, let alone survive a mission that had been deemed impossible by every expert who had studied it. The Thornfield Air Base Command Center, buried 3 stories underground and protected by walls of reinforced concrete, housed the most sophisticated military command and control facility in the Western Hemisphere. Dozens of large-screen displays showed real-time intelligence from satellites, reconnaissance drones, and electronic warfare aircraft. The air was thick with tension as generals, colonels, and intelligence analysts watched a maintenance worker attempt what their best pilots had died trying to accomplish. "This is insane," muttered General Harrison Drake, the base commander whose silver hair and stern expression reflected 4 decades of military service. His fingers drummed nervously against the polished surface of the command table as he watched Rivera's aircraft appear as a tiny blip on the tactical display. "We're watching a mechanic fly a suicide mission because we've run out of qualified pilots." Colonel Victoria Sterling, the wing commander responsible for all stealth bomber operations at Thornfield, stood rigid with professional discipline, but her eyes betrayed the same disbelief that gripped everyone in the room. Sterling had personally overseen the selection and training of every pilot qualified to fly the B-22 Phantom. The aircraft systems were so complex, its stealth characteristics so demanding to manage, that it took 2 years of intensive training to produce a single qualified pilot. The idea that a maintenance technician could simply climb into the cockpit and fly combat missions defied everything she understood about military aviation. "Sir," Sterling said quietly to General Drake, "Rivera hasn't logged a single hour of flight time in our records. According to her personnel file, She's never even been inside a flight simulator. How is she managing to fly that aircraft? The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, impossible to answer and increasingly disturbing to contemplate. Rivera's maintenance records showed someone with exceptional technical knowledge of aircraft systems. But technical knowledge and flying ability were completely different skill sets. Understanding how an engine worked didn't mean you could pilot a 170-foot flying wing through enemy airspace while managing stealth characteristics that required split-second timing and mathematical precision. What none of them knew what Rivera's carefully sanitized personnel file concealed was that the woman they saw as a simple mechanic had once been considered the most naturally gifted pilot in the experimental flight test program. Her current assignment maintaining aircraft wasn't a limitation of her abilities. It was a carefully constructed cover identity that had hidden her true expertise for reasons that went far beyond what anyone at Thornfield Air Base was cleared to know. The mission that had brought them to this desperate moment began 6 weeks earlier when intelligence satellites detected construction activity at a heavily fortified facility in the Valdres Mountains. Analysis revealed that the enemy was building an underground nuclear weapons manufacturing plant, hidden beneath hundreds of feet of solid rock and protected by the most advanced air defense network ever deployed. The facility represented a direct threat to global security, but its location made conventional military strikes impossible. 3 previous attempts to destroy the target had ended in disaster. Major Thomas Hawthorne, a veteran pilot with over 3,000 hours in stealth aircraft, had been shot down 50 miles from the target. Captain David Kellerman, fresh from the Air Force's most elite training program, had managed to penetrate within 20 miles before his aircraft was detected and destroyed. Squadron leader Rachel Martinez, arguably the most skilled bomber pilot of her generation, had actually reached the target area before enemy interceptors overwhelmed her aircraft's defensive systems. Each failure had cost the military not just a highly trained pilot, but also a $2.8 billion aircraft loaded with the most advanced stealth and electronic warfare technology available. More critically, each failed mission had given the enemy valuable intelligence about American capabilities, making subsequent attempts even more dangerous. As Rivera's aircraft disappeared into the electronic fog of the enemy's jamming systems, the command center fell silent except for the steady hum of cooling systems and the occasional whispered status update from intelligence analysts monitoring the mission through classified channels. Everyone understood they were witnessing something unprecedented. Maintenance worker attempting what the military's best pilots had died trying to achieve. The woman they had called just a mechanic was flying alone into the most dangerous airspace on Earth, carrying the hopes of a desperate military command and the weight of a mission that could change the course of global security. What happened next would either vindicate one of the most unconventional command decisions in military history, or add another tragedy to a mission that had already claimed too many lives. But as Shadow 7's engines whispered through the darkness toward its impossible target, those watching from the safety of the command bunker had no idea they were about to witness the emergence of a pilot whose skills would redefine their understanding of what was possible in the deadly art of aerial warfare. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 6 months before that fateful night over the Valdres Mountains, Staff Sergeant Alexis Rivera was nothing more than another set of coveralls moving through the cavernous depths of Hangar Delta 7 at Thornfield Air Base. The massive facility, carved into the Nevada mountainside and sealed behind blast-proof doors, housed the most classified aircraft in the American arsenal. But Rivera might as well have been invisible to the officers and elite pilots who strode through her workplace. With the confidence of gods among mortals, that at 5:30 a.m. every morning, while the rest of the base still slept, Rivera would badge through the multiple security checkpoints that protected the hangar's secrets. Her steel-toed boots echoed against the polished concrete floor as she made her way to her workstation, a cluttered corner filled with diagnostic equipment, technical manuals, and the specialized tools required to maintain aircraft that cost more than the gross domestic product of small nations. Rivera's daily routine was as predictable as the sunrise over the desert mountains. She would review the maintenance logs from the previous shift, noting any anomalies or concerns flagged by the night crew. Then began the methodical process of inspecting, testing, and servicing the B-22 Phantom stealth bombers that represented the cutting edge of military aviation technology. Her movements were precise and economical, each action serving a specific purpose, as she ensured that every system met the exacting standards required for aircraft that might mean the difference between victory and defeat in future conflicts. The other maintenance personnel respected Rivera's technical knowledge, but she remained somewhat apart from the casual camaraderie that typically developed among enlisted crews working long shifts in isolated facilities. While her colleagues gathered in the break room to share stories, complain about supervisors, or discuss their weekend plans, Rivera would more often be found studying technical documentation or reviewing system specifications with the intensity of someone preparing for an exam that would never come. "Rivera's got no social life whatsoever," observed Airman First Class Danny Torres as he watched her poring over hydraulic system schematics during what should have been her lunch break. "I mean, she's professional and knows her stuff better than anyone, but she never hangs out after shift, never talks about family or hobbies. It's like her whole world revolves around these aircraft." Staff Sergeant Lisa Chun, who supervised the day shift maintenance operations, had noticed the same pattern during Rivera's 18 months at Thornfield. "She's the most technically competent person I've ever worked with," Chun had mentioned to her husband during a recent dinner conversation. "Can diagnose problems that stump technicians with twice her experience. Understands system interactions that most people need computer models to figure out. But there's something about her that suggests she's not telling us everything about her background." Rivera's living situation reflected the same intentional simplicity that characterized her work routine. She occupied a small apartment in the base housing complex, furnished with standard military-issue furniture and decorated with nothing that revealed personal history or interests beyond her professional duties. Her neighbors knew her as a quiet, reliable tenant who kept regular hours and never caused problems. But if they were curious about her past assignments or personal life, they kept such questions to themselves. The few personal items in Rivera's apartment told no stories that would satisfy curious observers. Technical manuals lined the shelves, next to military regulations and a small collection of books about aviation history and aerodynamic theory. There were no photographs displaying family gatherings or friends from previous assignments, no souvenirs from exotic duty stations, no evidence of hobbies or interests that extended beyond her professional responsibilities. It was the living space of someone who had deliberately chosen to leave their history behind, or perhaps someone whose true history was too sensitive to display openly. Rivera's interactions with the pilots who flew the aircraft she maintained were consistently professional but notably restrained. When Captain James Fitzgerald, one of the squadron's most experienced B-22 pilots, asked detailed questions about engine performance characteristics, Rivera would provide precise, helpful answers that demonstrated deep understanding of the aircraft's capabilities. But she never volunteered additional information or engaged in the kind of technical discussions that might have revealed the full depth of her knowledge. "Rivera knows these systems better than some of the engineers who designed them," Captain Fitzgerald had observed to his fellow pilots after a particularly thorough pre-flight briefing. "When I ask about engine performance under different atmospheric conditions, she doesn't just recite manual specifications. She explains how the systems actually behave in real-world operations, like she's seen them tested under every possible scenario." The contrast between Rivera's humble position and her obvious technical competence had not gone entirely unnoticed by her supervisors. But military bureaucracy moved slowly when it came to recognizing exceptional talent in unexpected places. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, the senior non-commissioned officer responsible for all maintenance operations in Hangar Delta 7, had tried several times to encourage Rivera to apply for advanced technical training programs that could lead to promotion and increased responsibilities. "Rivera, you've got the knowledge base to be running your own maintenance section," Rodriguez had told her during a recent performance evaluation. "Why aren't you interested in moving up the ranks? Someone with your capabilities should be training other technicians, not spending all her time turning wrenches." Rivera's response had been characteristically diplomatic and deflecting. "I'm satisfied with my current assignment, Sergeant. The work is challenging and important, and I feel like I'm contributing to the mission effectively." What puzzled Rodriguez and others was that Rivera seemed to actively avoid recognition or opportunities for advancement. When the maintenance section was selected to receive a commendation for exceptional performance, Rivera had somehow managed to be absent during the ceremony. When her supervisor recommended her for a prestigious technical training program, Rivera had politely declined, stating that she preferred to remain in her current position. The mystery of Rivera's background was further deepened by her exceptional physical fitness routine. While most maintenance personnel maintained the basic fitness standards required by military regulations, Rivera's exercise regimen suggested someone preparing for far more demanding physical challenges. She ran precise distances each morning, completed strength training that exceeded normal requirements, and maintained the kind of conditioning typically associated with aircrew rather than ground support personnel. When younger airmen asked about her exercise habits, Rivera would simply state that maintaining peak physical condition was important for military readiness, but her training routine suggested preparation for something far more demanding than the physical requirements of aircraft maintenance. Her conditioning program included elements that seemed designed to prepare for high G forces, spatial disorientation, and extended periods of intense concentration, exactly the kind of preparation that pilots underwent, but which made no sense for someone whose job involved working on aircraft while they remained safely on the ground. As Rivera completed another day of meticulous maintenance work, ensuring that multi-billion-dollar aircraft were ready for missions she would never be allowed to fly, none of her colleagues suspected that the quiet woman in coveralls possessed knowledge and experience that exceeded that of the elite pilots whose aircraft she serviced. Her carefully maintained anonymity was about to be shattered by circumstances that would force her to reveal capabilities that her personnel file insisted she had never possessed. The first hint that Staff Sergeant Alexis Rivera possessed knowledge far beyond her maintenance role came during a routine inspection of Shadow 4, one of the squadron's primary operational aircraft. Rivera was conducting her standard pre-flight systems check when she noticed something that would have escaped the attention of most technicians: a faint, barely perceptible vibration in the port engine's intake manifold that occurred only when specific atmospheric conditions aligned with particular throttle settings. The anomaly was so subtle that the aircraft's built-in diagnostic systems showed green across all parameters. The engine temperatures, pressure readings, and performance metrics all fell well within acceptable ranges. To any casual observer, Shadow 4 was functioning perfectly, ready for whatever mission might be assigned. But Rivera's trained ear detected a harmonic frequency in the engine's operation that suggested a potential resonance issue that could develop into catastrophic failure under specific flight conditions. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," Rivera called to her supervisor, who was reviewing maintenance schedules at his desk overlooking the hangar floor. "I need to flag Shadow 4 for extended engine inspection. There's a harmonic pattern in the port intake that suggests potential resonance problems." Rodriguez approached Rivera's workstation with the weary patience of someone who had learned to take her technical observations seriously, even when they seemed to identify problems that more experienced technicians had missed. Unlike some supervisors, who might have dismissed such concerns as overcautiousness, Rodriguez had worked with Rivera long enough to understand that her recommendations were invariably based on legitimate technical insights. "What kind of harmonic pattern?" Rodriguez asked, studying the diagnostic readouts that showed normal parameters across all monitored systems. "The computer diagnostics aren't showing any anomalies." Rivera pointed to specific data streams on her handheld analyzer, highlighting frequency patterns that required careful interpretation to understand. The intake resonance occurs only when atmospheric pressure drops below 28.5 inches of mercury, while the engine operates at 73 to 76% power settings. Under those conditions, the harmonic frequency could excite structural vibrations that the intake manifold wasn't designed to handle. The specificity of Rivera's analysis impressed Rodriguez, but it also raised questions about how a maintenance technician had developed such sophisticated understanding of engine behavior under varying atmospheric conditions. Most aircraft mechanics learn to identify problems through obvious symptoms, unusual noises, abnormal temperatures, or visible wear patterns. Rivera's analysis required understanding complex interactions between atmospheric physics, engine dynamics, and structural engineering that went far beyond standard maintenance training. "Rivera," Rodriguez said carefully, "how do you know about intake manifold resonance under specific atmospheric conditions?" "That's the kind of analysis that usually comes from flight test engineering, not routine maintenance." Rivera hesitated for a moment, recognizing that her explanation would need to be carefully worded to avoid revealing knowledge that shouldn't exist in her official background. "I've studied the technical literature extensively, Sergeant." "When you work on systems this complex, understanding the theoretical basis for potential failures helps identify problems before they become critical." The explanation was technically accurate but incomplete. Rodriguez sensed there was more to Rivera's expertise than extensive reading of technical manuals, but military protocol discouraged supervisors from probing too deeply into subordinates' educational backgrounds or previous experience, unless it directly affected their current duties. What Rodriguez didn't know was that Rivera's identification of the resonance problem was based on direct experience with similar failures during classified flight test programs, where she had witnessed intake manifold failures that killed test pilots and destroyed irreplaceable prototype aircraft. Her analysis wasn't theoretical, it was based on having seen what happened when harmonic resonance patterns were ignored. The validation of Rivera's concerns came 3 days later when Shadow 4 was subjected to extended ground testing under varying atmospheric conditions, at precisely the pressure and power settings Rivera had specified. The port intake manifold began exhibiting structural vibrations that would have led to catastrophic failure if the aircraft had been operating at altitude, where emergency landing would have been impossible. "Jesus Christ," muttered Technical Sergeant Williams as he reviewed the test results. Rivera called this failure mode to the exact decimal point. How did she predict something this specific? The incident established Rivera's reputation among the maintenance crew as someone whose technical insights went far beyond routine troubleshooting, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about the source of her expertise. Master Sergeant Rodriguez found himself wondering whether Rivera's personnel file contained gaps that concealed previous assignments or training that would explain her unusual capabilities. During the following weeks, similar incidents reinforced the impression that Rivera possessed knowledge that extended beyond her official qualifications. When Captain Sarah Bennett reported intermittent flight control responsiveness issues during high-altitude maneuvers, Rivera identified the problem as a software timing conflict in the fly-by-wire system that occurred only when external atmospheric pressure dropped below specific thresholds, while the aircraft maintained particular angles of attack. The flight control computers are processing atmospheric data inputs 0.3 seconds slower than optimal when operating above 35,000 feet in low-pressure conditions, Rivera explained to the assembled maintenance team. The delay creates a lag in control surface responses that pilots interpret as sluggish handling characteristics. Her solution involved adjusting software parameters that most maintenance technicians wouldn't have known existed, much less understood how to modify safely. The fix resolved Captain Bennett's concerns completely, but it also demonstrated that Rivera understood flight control systems at a level typically restricted to software engineers and test pilots. Captain Bennett herself became curious about Rivera's unusual expertise after the flight control issue was resolved. During a chance encounter in the base commissary, Bennett approached Rivera with questions about the technical fix that had solved her aircraft handling problems. "Sergeant Rivera, I have to ask, how did you know about that software timing issue? I've been flying these aircraft for 4 years, and I've never heard any of the other pilots or maintenance people mention that kind of problem." Rivera's response was characteristically modest and deflecting. "MAAM, when you study the technical documentation thoroughly, you start to understand how different systems interact under various conditions. The software timing parameters are documented in the maintenance manuals, but most people don't read them carefully enough to understand the implications." Captain Bennett found the explanation unsatisfying but didn't pursue the matter further. However, she began paying closer attention to Rivera's work and noticed that the maintenance specialist approached aircraft systems with a familiarity that seemed to go beyond book learning. Rivera moved around the B-22 aircraft with the confidence of someone who understood not just how the systems worked, but how they behaved under operational conditions. The pattern of Rivera identifying problems that others missed continued over the following months. She predicted a hydraulic pump failure in Shadow 6 based on subtle pressure variations that occurred only during specific flight profiles. She identified a potential radar cross-section increase in Shadow 3 caused by microscopic misalignment of stealth coating panels that would have compromised the aircraft's signature during combat operations. Each success enhanced her reputation for technical excellence, while deepening the mystery of how someone with her official background had acquired such sophisticated expertise. Technical Sergeant Lisa Murphy, who had worked aircraft maintenance for 12 years across multiple aircraft types, finally voiced what many of her colleagues were thinking during a coffee break in the hangar break room. "There's something about Rivera that doesn't add up," Murphy said quietly to her fellow technicians. "She knows things about these aircraft that you don't learn from maintenance school or technical manuals. The way she analyzes system interactions, predicts failure modes, understands operational limitations. It's like she's actually flown these aircraft under combat conditions." The observation hung in the air like a question that no one wanted to ask directly. Rivera's expertise was becoming impossible to ignore, but it was also becoming increasingly difficult to explain through conventional understanding of how maintenance personnel acquired their knowledge. Colonel Nathan Cross strode across the polished floors of Hangar Delta 7 with the unmistakable confidence of someone who had never encountered a challenge he couldn't master through superior skill, extensive training, and unwavering determination. At 35 years old, he was the youngest pilot ever selected to command the 94th Strategic Bomber Squadron, a distinction he wore like invisible armor that deflected doubt and reinforced his position at the apex of military aviation excellence. Cross's flight suit bore patches that told the story of an exceptional career: Distinguished Flying Cross, Air Force Test Pilot School, Advanced Combat Systems Training, and the coveted B-22 Phantom Instructor Pilot designation that marked him as one of only 8 officers qualified to train others to fly the world's most sophisticated stealth bomber. His academic credentials were equally impressive: summa cum laude graduate from the Air Force Academy with degrees in aeronautical engineering and applied mathematics, followed by a master's degree in aerospace systems from MIT that he'd completed. During off-duty hours while serving as a test pilot at Edwards Air Force Base. Another perfect morning for pushing the envelope, Cross announced to the maintenance crew as he conducted his pre-flight inspection of Shadow 2, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone accustomed to being the most qualified person in any aviation-related conversation. The weather briefing had indicated ideal conditions for the advanced stealth penetration exercises planned for the day, clear skies, minimal atmospheric turbulence, and electromagnetic conditions that would provide clean baseline data for evaluating the aircraft's radar cross-section performance. Major Deanna Pierce, Cross's deputy commander and the second most experienced B-22 pilot in the squadron, followed him through the inspection routine with the systematic precision that had made her his preferred partner for the most demanding training missions. Pierce had earned her position through a combination of exceptional flying ability, tactical brilliance, and the kind of analytical intelligence that allowed her to master complex systems that challenged even seasoned aviators. The mission profile calls for deep penetration through the Nellis Range Complex, Cross explained to the assembled ground crew, pointing to tactical displays that showed their planned route through some of the most sophisticated simulated air defenses in the world. We'll be testing the Phantom's signature management against radar systems that replicate the most advanced threats our adversaries can deploy. This isn't routine training. This is validation of capabilities that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. Cross's reputation among his fellow pilots was built on more than just academic achievement and technical knowledge. During his 3 years commanding the 94th Squadron, he had established training standards that pushed both aircraft and aircrew to their operational limits while maintaining a perfect safety record. His understanding of the B-22's capabilities was so comprehensive that he could discuss the aircraft's stealth characteristics, weapons systems, and defensive countermeasures with the kind of expertise that impressed even the engineers who had designed those systems. The relationship between Cross and his maintenance personnel reflected the traditional military hierarchy where officers commanded and enlisted personnel executed orders with professional competence but limited input into operational decision-making. Cross respected the technical expertise of his ground crew, but he also understood that responsibility for mission success rested with the aircrew who possessed the training, experience, and clearance levels necessary to make split-second decisions in complex tactical situations. Sergeant Rivera, Cross called out as Alexis completed her pre-flight systems verification on Shadow 2. I notice you've been flagging minor system variations that other technicians might consider normal operational parameters. While I appreciate thoroughness, I want to make sure we're not creating maintenance delays for issues that don't affect mission capability. Rivera looked up from the avionics panel she'd been testing, her expression remaining neutral despite the implicit criticism embedded in Cross's comment. Sir, all systems are within acceptable parameters for your mission. I've documented some minor variations for trending analysis, but nothing that would affect aircraft performance or mission success. Cross nodded with the satisfaction of someone whose expectations had been confirmed. The maintenance specialist was competent and dedicated, but her tendency to identify potential problems in systems that were functioning normally suggested the kind of overcautiousness that could interfere with operational requirements if not properly managed. That's exactly what I want to hear, Cross replied, his tone carrying just enough condescension to establish the hierarchy without crossing into outright disrespect. The B-22 is an incredibly robust aircraft, designed to operate in conditions that would ground conventional platforms. Minor system variations are just part of managing complex technology. Major Pierce, who had been listening to the exchange while reviewing weather data, added her own perspective on the relationship between aircrew and maintenance personnel. Sergeant Rivera, your detailed maintenance logs are appreciated, but Remember that pilots are trained to manage aircraft systems under operational conditions that can't be replicated during ground testing. What might look like a potential problem on the ground often proves insignificant during actual flight operations. The comment reflected Pierce's genuine respect for thorough maintenance work, but it also reinforced the institutional assumption that operational flying required expertise that maintenance personnel, regardless of their technical knowledge, simply didn't possess. In Pierce's experience, the most cautious maintenance recommendations often came from technicians who understood aircraft systems theoretically, but lacked the practical experience of managing those systems under the stress of actual flight operations. Cross's confidence in his own judgment wasn't entirely misplaced. His flight training record included perfect scores on evaluations that had challenged other exceptional pilots, and his understanding of the B-22's capabilities was genuinely comprehensive. During his qualification training, he had mastered emergency procedures that required split-second decision-making under conditions that would overwhelm less capable aviators. His instructors had described him as a natural whose flying ability combined technical precision with tactical instincts that couldn't be taught through conventional training methods. The beauty of these advanced aircraft, Cross continued, addressing both Pierce and the maintenance crew, is that their automated systems handle most of the complex monitoring and adjustment functions. Modern military aviation has evolved beyond the days when pilots had to manually manage every aspect of aircraft operation. The B-22's computers can process system data faster and more accurately than human operators, which means that minor variations that might concern maintenance personnel are automatically compensated by the aircraft's flight management systems. Rivera listened to Cross's explanation while continuing her pre-flight documentation, noting his confidence in automated systems and his assumptions about the relationship between theoretical knowledge and operational expertise. What Cross didn't realize was that Rivera's concerns about minor system variations were based on understanding how those systems behaved under operational stress conditions that his training, comprehensive though it was, had never included. Institutional hierarchy that placed Cross at the top of the aviation food chain was reinforced by everything visible about Rivera's position and background. She wore enlisted stripes rather than officer insignia, worked in maintenance rather than operations, and had never been introduced as possessing qualifications beyond her technical specialization. In Cross's worldview, which was shaped by years of military experience and institutional training, people ended up in positions that matched their capabilities and potential. Besides, Cross added as he prepared to begin his final pre-flight briefing with Pierce, if maintenance personnel really understood the operational complexities of flying these aircraft, they'd be in the cockpit instead of the hangar. There's a reason some people maintain aircraft and others command them in combat. The comment drew nods of agreement from several nearby personnel, though Rivera noticed that Master Sergeant Rodriguez remained silent. The senior NCO had worked with enough pilots and maintenance technicians to understand that competence didn't always align with rank or job assignment, but challenging an officer's assumptions about military hierarchy wasn't worth the potential consequences. As Cross and Pierce completed their mission briefing and prepared for takeoff, Rivera returned to her maintenance documentation, recording system parameters with the same meticulous attention to detail that had characterized all her work at Thornfield Air Base. What none of them could have predicted was that Cross's confidence in his own superiority and his dismissal of Rivera's expertise would soon be tested under conditions that would reveal just how dangerous it could be to underestimate capabilities based solely on rank and job assignment. The intelligence briefing that would change everything arrived at Thornfield Air Base on a classified courier flight at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning in late September. By 0600, the contents of that briefing had filtered through the chain of command to Colonel Cross's office, where emergency mission planning sessions began immediately. The target was a heavily fortified nuclear research facility in the Valdres Mountains, protected by the most sophisticated integrated air defense network ever deployed by hostile forces. Within 12 hours, Cross found himself staring at tactical displays that showed a mission profile beyond anything in standard training doctrine. The facility was buried beneath 400 feet of solid granite, accessible only through precision strikes that would require penetrating deeper into enemy territory than any previous stealth bomber mission. Initial computer simulations showed success, probabilities that made even experienced military planners uncomfortable, but the strategic importance of the target made the mission unavoidable. This is exactly why we have the B-22 program, Cross declared to his assembled aircrew during the initial mission briefing. Conventional aircraft couldn't even attempt this kind of deep penetration strike. But the Phantom was designed for missions that others consider impossible. As maintenance crews began the intensive preparation required for such a high-stakes operation, Rivera found herself conducting the most thorough pre-flight inspection of her career. Every system required verification beyond normal standards. Every component needed documentation that would satisfy investigators if the mission failed. And every potential weakness had to be identified and corrected before the aircraft left Thornfield's protected airspace. It was during this exhaustive inspection that Rivera discovered something that made her blood run cold. The electromagnetic signature analysis data from Shadow 2's recent training flights showed subtle variations in the aircraft's stealth characteristics that would be insignificant during routine operations, but could prove catastrophic during deep penetration missions through advanced radar networks. The variations were so minor that they fell well within acceptable parameters for normal flight operations. The aircraft's stealth coding showed no visible damage. The airframe geometry remained perfect, and all electronic systems functioned flawlessly. But Rivera's analysis of the signature data revealed pattern shifts that suggested microscopic changes in the radar-absorbent materials that could increase the aircraft's detectability under specific atmospheric conditions. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," Rivera called urgently, her voice carrying an intensity that immediately caught her supervisor's attention. "I need you to review these stealth signature measurements from Shadow 2's recent flights. There are variations that could compromise mission effectiveness." Rodriguez approached Rivera's workstation with the focused attention of someone who had learned to take her technical assessments seriously, even when they identified problems that weren't immediately obvious to other personnel. The data she displayed showed electromagnetic signature patterns that required sophisticated analysis to interpret properly. "What kind of variations are we talking about?" Rodriguez asked, studying the complex waveforms and spectral analysis charts that covered Rivera's displays. The radar cross-section measurements show increases of 0.3 to 0.7 decibels at specific frequency ranges when atmospheric moisture content exceeds 70% humidity. Rivera explained, highlighting the relevant data points. Under normal conditions, this wouldn't affect mission success. But the target area weather forecast shows humidity levels approaching 85% with possible precipitation. Those conditions could make Shadow 2 detectable to advanced radar systems at ranges that would compromise pilot safety. Rodriguez studied the analysis carefully, recognizing that Rivera's concerns were based on understanding electromagnetic theory and stealth technology that went far beyond standard maintenance training. The variations she had identified were subtle enough that most technicians would have dismissed them as normal measurement uncertainty, but her mathematical analysis suggested they represented genuine changes in the aircraft's signature characteristics. "Rivera, this analysis assumes that enemy radar systems can detect signature variations of less than 1 decibel under operational conditions," Rodriguez said carefully. "Are you certain that such small changes would actually affect mission success?" Rivera's response came with the quiet intensity of someone who understood exactly what those signature variations could mean in combat conditions. Sergeant, the intelligence briefings indicate that the target area is protected by the most advanced air defense network ever deployed. Those systems are specifically designed to detect stealth aircraft by analyzing exactly the kind of signature variations I'm seeing in this data. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Cross, who had come to the hangar to conduct his own pre-flight inspection and ensure that Shadow 2 was ready for the most demanding mission of his career. His presence immediately elevated the discussion from routine maintenance concerns to command-level decision-making. "What's the issue with my aircraft?" Cross asked, his tone carrying the authority of someone accustomed to receiving clear, actionable information about matters affecting mission success. Rivera hesitated momentarily. Knowing that her explanation would need to be both technically accurate and convincing enough to override the judgment of a supremely confident pilot who had never encountered a stealth bomber mission he couldn't execute successfully. "Sir, I've identified variations in Shadow 2's electromagnetic signature that could affect stealth effectiveness under the atmospheric conditions forecast for the target area," Rivera said respectfully. "The changes are small, but they could increase detectability enough to compromise mission success." Cross studied the data for several minutes, his expression reflecting the analytical intelligence that had made him one of the Air Force's most capable pilots. However, his interpretation of Rivera's analysis was filtered through assumptions about the relationship between theoretical concerns and operational realities that had been shaped by years of successful missions. "Sergeant Rivera, I appreciate your thoroughness," Cross said finally, his voice carrying the patient tone of someone explaining complex matters to a subordinate who lacked the broader context necessary to understand operational priorities. "But you're talking about variations that are barely measurable under laboratory conditions. In the real world, atmospheric interference, electronic countermeasures, and tactical maneuvering create signature variations far larger than what you're concerned about." Rivera felt the familiar frustration of knowing her analysis was correct while lacking the authority to insist that her concerns be taken seriously. "Sir, with respect, the intelligence assessments indicate that the target area defenses are specifically calibrated to detect exactly these kinds of minor signature variations. The margin for error on this mission is smaller than normal operational parameters." Major Pierce, who had been listening to the discussion while reviewing her own mission materials, added her perspective with the diplomatic skill that had made her Cross's most trusted deputy. "Sergeant Rivera, your attention to detail is commendable. But remember that pilot training includes extensive instruction on managing stealth characteristics under operational conditions. Colonel Cross has more experience with these systems under combat conditions than anyone else in the Air Force." The comment reflected Pierce's genuine respect for Rivera's technical competence, but it also reinforced the institutional hierarchy that placed operational experience above analytical expertise when mission decisions were being made. In Pierce's worldview, theoretical concerns about system performance were less important than proven pilot capability under actual combat stress. Cross's confidence in his own assessment was reinforced by everything he could observe about Rivera's background and position. She was undoubtedly competent within her area of responsibility, but her concerns reflected the kind of overcautiousness that could paralyze operational decision-making if given too much weight in mission planning. "Here's the bottom line," Cross said with the decisive authority that had made him successful in command positions. "Shadow 2's signature variations are within acceptable parameters for all published operational standards. My training and experience tell me that the aircraft is fully capable of completing this mission successfully. I'm not going to compromise mission timing based on theoretical concerns about unmeasurable signature variations." Rivera understood that further argument would be counterproductive and potentially insubordinate. Military protocol required that she accept the colonel's operational judgment regardless of her personal assessment of the technical risks involved. "Understood, sir," Rivera replied professionally. "Shadow 2 is cleared for flight operations, according to all standard specifications." What she didn't say, what military hierarchy prevented her from explaining, was that her concerns weren't based on theoretical analysis or overcautious interpretation of maintenance data. Rivera's warnings were based on classified knowledge of how similar signature variations had affected other stealth aircraft during missions that had never been publicly acknowledged. Operations where minor electromagnetic signature changes had meant the difference between mission success and pilot death. As Colonel Cross and Major Pierce completed their pre-flight preparations, confident that their expertise and training would overcome any challenges the mission might present, Rivera returned to her documentation with the heavy knowledge that her warnings had been heard, but not heeded by those whose lives would depend on decisions made in the next few hours. Colonel Cross climbed into the cockpit of Shadow 2 with the steady confidence of someone who had spent years proving that exceptional skill could overcome any challenge military aviation could present. The pre-flight checklist proceeded flawlessly, each system responding with the precision that justified his faith in both the aircraft's capabilities and his own mastery of its complex technologies. As the massive stealth bomber rolled toward the runway in the pre-dawn darkness, Cross felt the familiar surge of professional satisfaction that came with commanding the world's most advanced war machine. "Shadow 2, you are cleared for takeoff on runway 09er, came the voice of the control tower, carrying the routine professionalism that masked the extraordinary nature of the mission about to unfold. "Weather conditions are optimal, winds CALM, visibility unlimited. Good hunting, Colonel." The takeoff was textbook perfect. Shadow 2 lifted into the Nevada sky with the graceful power that made the B-22 Phantom a masterpiece of engineering, its engines providing thrust while maintaining the whisper-quiet operation that was essential to its stealth characteristics. As Cross settled into the steady climb toward cruising altitude, every instrument confirmed what his experience had predicted. Rivera's concerns about electromagnetic signature variations were proving to be exactly the kind of theoretical worry that dissolved under the reality of operational flying. "Shadow 2 to Thornfield Control," Cross transmitted as he reached 25,000 feet. "All systems nominal, stealth characteristics optimal. Proceeding to waypoint Alpha as planned. Aircraft performance is exactly as expected for this mission profile." In the control tower, General Drake and Colonel Sterling monitored the mission progress with the focused attention that high-stakes operations demanded. The tactical displays showed Shadow 2 as a faint blip moving steadily toward enemy airspace, its signature characteristics well within the parameters that should ensure invisibility to hostile radar systems. "Cross sounds confident as usual," Sterling observed to General Drake, noting the calm professionalism in the pilot's voice transmissions. His pre-flight briefing was thorough, and he seemed completely comfortable with the mission parameters, despite the challenges involved. General Drake nodded, his own confidence reinforced by Cross's track record of successful missions under conditions that had challenged less capable pilots. Cross has never encountered a stealth bomber mission he couldn't execute. If anyone can penetrate the Valdres air defenses and successfully strike that facility, it's him. Rodriguez studied the data with growing alarm, recognizing that Rivera's earlier predictions had been not just accurate, but conservative. The stealth characteristics that Cross was depending on for survival were degrading in real time, creating exactly the kind of vulnerability that could turn a successful mission into a catastrophic loss of both aircraft and crew. "Rivera, these readings suggest that Shadow 2 is essentially visible to anyone looking for it," Rodriguez said grimly. "How long has the signature been degrading at this rate?" "The degradation began exactly when I predicted it would, based on the atmospheric conditions over the target area," Rivera replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone watching a Disaster unfold in slow motion. Colonel Cross is flying through the most heavily defended airspace on Earth, while broadcasting his position to enemy systems that were designed specifically to detect stealth aircraft with these exact signature characteristics. The conversation was interrupted by an encrypted communication from the National Security Agency's Signals Intelligence Center, reporting dramatic increases in enemy communications traffic and radar activity that suggested hostile forces were tracking an unidentified aircraft operating in their airspace. The intelligence update confirmed Rivera's worst fears. Shadow 2's compromised stealth characteristics were allowing enemy systems to monitor Cross's progress with precision that made his mission both tactically compromised and personally suicidal. In his underground command bunker, Colonel Viktor Petrov watched with professional satisfaction as his integrated air defense network maintained continuous tracking of the American stealth bomber. The electromagnetic signature variations that had concerned Rivera were providing his systems with targeting data of exceptional quality, allowing his operators to predict Cross's route, altitude, and timing with accuracy that would ensure successful engagement when the optimal moment arrived. The American pilot seems unaware that we're tracking his every movement, Petrov observed to his senior radar operator, studying displays that showed Shadow 2's progress through their airspace with crystalline clarity. Their stealth technology is impressive under ideal conditions, but atmospheric effects are making their aircraft visible to our detection systems. We'll let him penetrate to within striking distance of his target before revealing our capabilities. Back aboard Shadow 2, Cross was beginning to experience the first genuine doubts about his mission's prospects for success. The electronic warning indicators were showing activity patterns that suggested enemy surveillance systems possessed capabilities that exceeded all previous intelligence estimates. While his aircraft stealth systems continued to show green status lights, the electronic environment around him was becoming increasingly active in ways that made him question whether his invisibility was as complete as his instruments indicated. Thornfield. Control, Shadow 2, Cross transmitted, no longer able to completely suppress the concern creeping into his voice. Enemy electronic activity is intensifying as I approach the target area. I'm not showing direct threat indications, but the surveillance environment is more sophisticated than briefed. Request updated intelligence assessment on enemy air defense capabilities. The response from Thornfield carried the weight of command authority struggling with incomplete information and rapidly evolving tactical situations. Shadow 2, we're seeing the same increased activity from our monitoring stations. Intelligence assessment is being updated, but current analysis suggests you're still within acceptable risk parameters for mission continuation. What the intelligence analysts couldn't see, and what Cross's instruments weren't designed to detect, was that his aircraft's electromagnetic signature had degraded to the point where enemy radar systems were tracking him with targeting quality precision. The stealth characteristics that were supposed to protect him had been systematically compromised by exactly the atmospheric conditions that Rivera had identified during her pre-flight analysis. Rivera watched the telemetry data with growing horror. As Shadow 2's signature continued to deteriorate while Cross flew deeper into what had essentially become a carefully orchestrated trap. Her analysis showed that the aircraft was now detectable at ranges that would allow enemy surface-to-air missiles to engage with near certain probability of success. Yet military protocol prevented her from directly communicating her assessment to the pilot whose life depended on information that only she possessed. "This is a disaster in progress," Rivera said quietly to Rodriguez, her professional composure cracking under the strain of watching preventable catastrophe unfold. "Colonel Cross is flying blind into the most sophisticated air defense network ever deployed, and his stealth protection has been compromised to the point where he's essentially defenseless." Rodriguez felt the crushing weight of responsibility as he realized that Rivera's technical expertise, dismissed by operational commanders as overcautious theoretical analysis, was proving to be the most accurate assessment of the tactical situation. The electromagnetic signature variations that Cross had confidently dismissed as insignificant were creating exactly the vulnerability that could cost both the mission and the pilot's life. "Can we contact the command center and recommend mission?" "Abort?" Rodriguez asked, knowing that such a recommendation from maintenance personnel during an active combat operation would be unprecedented and potentially career-ending. Rivera's response carried the grim certainty of someone who understood that conventional military protocols were inadequate for the crisis developing in real time. "Sergeant, by the time our recommendation reaches Colonel Cross through normal channels, enemy air defenses will have engaged his aircraft. The signature degradation is accelerating, and he's approaching the engagement envelope of surface-to-air missile systems that were specifically designed to counter stealth aircraft with exactly these characteristics." As Shadow 2 continued its approach toward the target facility, Cross remained unaware that his mission had transformed from a challenging but achievable stealth penetration into a carefully orchestrated ambush. His confidence in his aircraft's capabilities and his own tactical expertise was about to be tested under conditions that would reveal the deadly consequences of dismissing technical expertise based solely on assumptions about military hierarchy and operational authority. The catastrophic failure began at exactly 0347 hours, when Colonel Cross was still 60 miles from his target and flying with the steady confidence of someone who believed his stealth protection remained intact. The first indication of disaster came not from his aircraft's warning systems, but from the sudden appearance of surface-to-air missile launch signatures that lit up his threat detection displays like a deadly constellation across the night sky. "Multiple SAM launches," Cross transmitted, his voice tight with the controlled adrenaline of someone whose tactical situation had just shifted from routine penetration to life-or-death combat. "I count at least 12 missile signatures converging on my position." "How the hell are they tracking me?" The question hung in the radio frequency like an accusation against every intelligence estimate, every tactical assumption, and every confident dismissal of technical concerns that had brought him to this moment. Cross threw Shadow 2 into evasive maneuvers that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their design limits, but the incoming missiles were tracking his movements with the precision that only came from high-quality radar locks on a clearly visible target in the command center at Thornfield Air Base. General Drake watched the tactical display with the sick realization that his most experienced pilot was fighting for survival against air defenses that had somehow achieved the impossible, detecting and targeting a B-22 Phantom stealth bomber. As if it were a conventional aircraft broadcasting its position on all frequencies. "How are they getting radar locks?" Drake demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who needed answers immediately. "Cross should be invisible to anything they can deploy. Our intelligence assessment showed no capability to detect stealth aircraft at these ranges." Colonel Sterling, studying the stream of telemetry data from Shadow 2, felt her professional confidence crumble as she realized that the enemy's tracking capability was far more sophisticated than any previous intelligence had suggested. "Sir, the missile tracking is too accurate for them to be guessing. They have genuine target acquisition on Shadow 2, which means our stealth characteristics have been compromised." Meanwhile, Rivera's monitoring station was painting the complete picture of the unfolding disaster with mathematical precision that made the situation even more horrifying. Her display showed exactly how Shadow 2's electromagnetic signature degradation had made Cross's aircraft visible to radar systems, specifically designed to exploit the kind of stealth vulnerabilities she had identified during pre-flight analysis. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez," Rivera called with barely controlled panic, "Shadow 2's signature has degraded to the point where enemy systems can track and target the aircraft with conventional surface-to-air missiles. Colonel Cross is defenseless against weapons that shouldn't even be able to see him." Rodriguez studied the data with growing alarm. recognizing that Rivera's earlier predictions had been not just accurate, but conservative. The stealth characteristics that Cross was depending on for survival were degrading in real time, creating exactly the kind of vulnerability that could turn a successful mission into a catastrophic loss of both aircraft and crew. Rivera, these readings suggest that Shadow 2 is essentially visible to anyone looking for it, Rodriguez said grimly. How long has the signature been degrading at this rate? The degradation began exactly when I predicted it would, based on the atmospheric conditions over the target area, Rivera replied, her voice carrying the weight of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. Colonel Cross is flying through the most heavily defended airspace on Earth, while broadcasting his position to enemy systems that were designed specifically to detect stealth aircraft with these exact signature characteristics. The conversation was interrupted by an encrypted communication from the National Security Agency's Signals Intelligence Center, reporting dramatic increases in enemy communications traffic and radar activity that suggested hostile forces were tracking an unidentified aircraft operating in their airspace. The intelligence update confirmed Rivera's worst fears. Shadow 2's compromised stealth characteristics were allowing enemy systems to monitor Cross's progress with precision that made his mission both tactically compromised and personally suicidal. In his underground command bunker, Colonel Viktor Petrov watched with professional satisfaction as his integrated air defense network maintained continuous tracking of the American stealth bomber. The electromagnetic signature variations that had concerned Rivera were providing his systems with targeting data of exceptional quality, allowing his operators to predict Cross's route, altitude, and timing with accuracy that would ensure successful engagement when the optimal moment arrived. The American pilot seems unaware that we're tracking his every movement, Petrov observed to his senior radar operator, studying displays that showed Shadow 2's progress through their airspace with crystalline clarity. Their stealth technology is impressive under ideal conditions, but atmospheric effects are making their aircraft visible to our detection systems. We'll let him penetrate to within striking distance of his target before revealing our capabilities. Back aboard Shadow 2, Cross was beginning to experience the first genuine doubts about his mission's prospects for success. The electronic warning indicators were showing activity patterns that suggested enemy surveillance systems possessed capabilities that exceeded all previous intelligence estimates. While his aircraft stealth systems continued to show green status lights, the electronic environment around him was becoming increasingly active in ways that made him question whether his invisibility was as complete as his instruments indicated. Thornfield. Control, Shadow 2, Cross transmitted, no longer able to completely suppress the concern creeping into his voice. Enemy electronic activity is intensifying as I approach the target area. I'm not showing direct threat indications, but the surveillance environment is more sophisticated than briefed. Request updated intelligence assessment on enemy air defense capabilities. The response from Thornfield carried the weight of command authority struggling with incomplete information and rapidly evolving tactical situations. Shadow 2, we're seeing the same increased activity from our monitoring stations. Intelligence assessment is being updated, but current analysis suggests you're still within acceptable risk parameters for mission continuation. What the intelligence analysts couldn't see, and what Cross's instruments weren't designed to detect, was that his aircraft's electromagnetic signature had degraded to the point where enemy radar systems were tracking him with targeting quality precision. The stealth characteristics that were supposed to protect him had been systematically compromised by exactly the atmospheric conditions that Rivera had identified during her pre-flight analysis. Rivera watched the telemetry data with growing horror. As Shadow 2's signature continued to deteriorate while Cross flew deeper into what had essentially become a carefully orchestrated trap, her analysis showed that the aircraft was now detectable at ranges that would allow enemy surface-to-air missiles to engage with near certain probability of success. Yet military protocol prevented her from directly communicating her assessment to the pilot whose life depended on information that only she possessed. "This is a disaster in progress," Rivera said quietly to Rodriguez, her professional composure cracking under the strain of watching preventable catastrophe unfold. "Colonel Cross is flying blind into the most sophisticated air defense network ever deployed, and his stealth protection has been compromised to the point where he's essentially defenseless." Rodriguez felt the crushing weight of responsibility as he realized that Rivera's technical expertise, dismissed by operational commanders as overcautious theoretical analysis, was proving to be the most accurate assessment of the tactical situation. The electromagnetic signature variations that Cross had confidently dismissed as insignificant were creating exactly the vulnerability that could cost both the mission and the pilot's life. "Can we contact the command center and recommend mission abort?" Rodriguez asked, knowing that such a recommendation from maintenance personnel during an active combat operation would be unprecedented and potentially career-ending. Rivera's response carried the grim certainty of someone who understood that conventional military protocols were inadequate for the crisis developing in real time. "Sergeant, by the time our recommendation reaches Colonel Cross through normal channels, enemy air defenses will have engaged his aircraft. The signature degradation is accelerating, and he's approaching the engagement envelope of surface-to-air missile systems that were specifically designed to counter stealth aircraft with exactly these characteristics." As Shadow 2 continued its approach toward the target facility, Cross remained unaware that his mission had transformed from a challenging but achievable stealth penetration into a carefully orchestrated ambush. His confidence in his aircraft's capabilities and his own tactical expertise was about to be tested under conditions that would reveal the deadly consequences of dismissing technical expertise based solely on assumptions about military hierarchy and operational authority. The catastrophic failure began at exactly 0347 hours, when Colonel Cross was still 60 miles from his target and flying with the steady confidence of someone who believed his stealth protection remained intact. The first indication of disaster came not from his aircraft's warning systems, but from the sudden appearance of surface-to-air missile launch signatures that lit up his threat detection displays like a deadly constellation across the night sky. "Multiple SAM launches," Cross transmitted, his voice tight with the controlled adrenaline of someone whose tactical situation had just shifted from routine penetration to life-or-death combat. "I count at least 12 missile signatures converging on my position." "How the hell are they tracking me?" The question hung in the radio frequency like an accusation against every intelligence estimate, every tactical assumption, and every confident dismissal of technical concerns that had brought him to this moment. Cross threw Shadow 2 into evasive maneuvers that pushed both aircraft and pilot to their design limits, but the incoming missiles were tracking his movements with the precision that only came from high-quality radar locks on a clearly visible target in the command center at Thornfield Air Base. General Drake watched the tactical display with the sick realization that his most experienced pilot was fighting for survival against air defenses that had somehow achieved the impossible, detecting and targeting a B-22 Phantom stealth bomber. As if it were a conventional aircraft broadcasting its position on all frequencies. "How are they getting radar locks?" Drake demanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who needed answers immediately. "Cross should be invisible to anything they can deploy. Our intelligence assessment showed no capability to detect stealth aircraft at these ranges." Colonel Sterling, studying the stream of telemetry data from Shadow 2, felt her professional confidence crumble as she realized that the enemy's tracking capability was far more sophisticated than any previous intelligence had suggested. "Sir, the missile tracking is too accurate for them to be guessing. They have genuine target acquisition on Shadow 2, which means our stealth characteristics have been compromised." Meanwhile, Rivera's monitoring station was painting the complete picture of the unfolding disaster with mathematical precision that made the situation even more horrifying. Her display showed exactly how Shadow 2's electromagnetic signature degradation had made Cross's aircraft visible to radar systems, specifically designed to exploit the kind of stealth vulnerabilities she had identified during pre-flight analysis. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, Rivera called with barely controlled panic. Shadow 2's signature has degraded to the point where enemy systems can track and target the aircraft with conventional surface-to-air missiles. Colonel Cross is defenseless against weapons that shouldn't even be able to see him. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had followed Rivera from the hangar, spoke with the stunned realization of someone whose worldview had just been completely inverted. "Ma'am, you've been working alongside us for 18 months, turning wrenches and cleaning aircraft parts, when you're actually more qualified to fly these missions than the pilots we serve." Rivera nodded grimly as she moved toward the communication console, her movements now carrying the confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide her capabilities. "Sergeant, the cover assignment taught me valuable lessons about aircraft maintenance that have made me a better pilot. But right now Colonel Cross needs expertise that can only be gained by surviving the kind of missions that killed other test pilots." General Drake made the command decision that would either save his pilot's life or compound the disaster with unprecedented breach of operational protocol. "Major Rivera, you have my authorization to take whatever actions are necessary to bring Colonel Cross home alive." Rivera acknowledged the general's order while establishing direct communication with Shadow 2, her voice transforming from respectful subordinate to experienced aviator as she contacted the pilot whose life now depended on following instructions from someone he had dismissed for months. "Shadow 2, this is Major Rivera," she transmitted with the calm authority of someone who had faced similar situations during the most classified flying in Air Force history. "Colonel Cross, I need you to listen very carefully because I'm going to talk you through evasive procedures that will break those radar locks and get you home safely." Cross's response came through the radio with confusion that temporarily overrode even the desperation of fighting for survival against impossible odds. "Rivera, what the hell is going on? How are you qualified to give flight instructions?" "Colonel, explanations can wait until you're safely on the ground," Rivera replied with the focused intensity of someone whose technical knowledge was about to become the difference between life and death. "Right now I need you to execute a maneuver called the Phantom Fade, which will exploit the atmospheric conditions that are currently compromising your stealth characteristics." The transformation in how Rivera was perceived by everyone in the command center was immediate and complete. The quiet maintenance specialist who had endured months of dismissive treatment was revealing herself as one of the most qualified pilots in the Air Force, someone whose expertise with the B-22 under extreme conditions exceeded that of anyone else available to help. "Major Rivera," General Drake said formally, recognizing both her restored rank and the extraordinary circumstances that had brought them to this moment. "What are Colonel Cross's chances of survival if he follows your instructions?" Rivera studied the tactical displays with the analytical skills that had made her the most successful test pilot in Project Nightfall's dangerous history. "Sir, the Phantom Fade was developed specifically to counter the kind of air defense systems that Colonel Cross is currently facing. If he executes the maneuver correctly, he should be able to break the radar locks and restore effective stealth characteristics." Chief Master Sergeant Williams, who had supervised maintenance operations and worked with Rivera daily, stepped forward with the question that reflected everyone's sense of surreal disbelief. "Ma'am, how does a major end up assigned to maintenance? Duty under false identity?" Rivera's answer reflected the complex security considerations that had shaped the most classified aspects of military aviation development. "Sergeant, Project Nightfall developed flight procedures and tactical knowledge that certain foreign intelligence services considered extremely valuable. Personnel with that knowledge were given protective assignments while potential security threats were neutralized. Colonel Sterling realized that she was witnessing the emergence of expertise that could redefine their understanding of what was possible in stealth bomber operations under the most challenging conditions. Major, the procedures you're describing, are they something that can be incorporated into standard training programs? Rivera's response came while she continued monitoring Cross's desperate situation, her attention divided between explaining her background and saving a pilot's life. Colonel, the Phantom Fade and similar procedures were classified beyond normal training programs because they require understanding atmospheric physics and stealth, characteristics that most pilots don't need for conventional operations. As Rivera prepared to guide Cross through the most dangerous flying maneuver in stealth bomber tactics, the command center fell silent with the recognition that they were about to witness either a miraculous rescue or a tragic confirmation that some situations exceeded even the most exceptional expertise. The woman they had known as just a maintenance specialist was about to demonstrate knowledge that only the most elite test pilots possessed, gained through flying missions so dangerous that most of the original Project Nightfall crew had not survived to share their hard-won expertise. With incoming missiles 23 seconds from impact, Major Alexis Rivera took control of the most dangerous rescue operation in stealth bomber history, her voice cutting through the radio frequency with the calm authority of someone who had survived similar situations during classified test flights that had killed less experienced pilots. Shadow 2, listen carefully, Rivera transmitted, her words carrying the weight of knowledge gained through the most hazardous flying in military aviation. You're going to execute a maneuver that will feel completely counterintuitive, but it's the only way to break those radar locks and survive the next 30 seconds. Colonel Cross, fighting to maintain control of an aircraft that was being pushed beyond its design limits, while multiple surface-to-air missiles converged on his position, found himself in the unprecedented situation of taking flight instructions from someone he had dismissed as a maintenance technician just hours earlier. Rivera, whatever you're going to tell me to do, you better be absolutely certain it will work, Cross transmitted, his voice tight with the controlled desperation of someone whose survival depended entirely on trusting expertise he didn't understand. I've got maybe 20 seconds before those missiles turn me into a very expensive fireball. Rivera's response came with the clinical precision of someone whose knowledge had been earned through flying missions so classified that their very existence was known only to a handful of senior commanders. Colonel, you're going to perform what we called the Phantom Fade. First, reduce power to minimum sustainable thrust and pitch the aircraft into a 15-degree climb while simultaneously rolling 30 degrees to starboard. The instructions seemed to violate every principle of evasive maneuvering that Cross had learned during years of advanced flight training. Reducing power while climbing would make the aircraft slower and more vulnerable, while the rolling motion would present a larger radar cross-section to pursuing missiles. Every instinct told him that following Rivera's directions would guarantee his destruction. Rivera, that maneuver will make me a sitting duck, Cross protested while watching missile approach indicators that showed impact in 18 seconds. Reducing power during evasive maneuvering contradicts everything I know about defensive flying. Colonel, trust me, Rivera replied with the absolute confidence of someone whose expertise had been proven under the most extreme conditions possible. The atmospheric conditions that are compromising your stealth characteristics create a specific electromagnetic shadow at that altitude and angle. The power reduction will drop you into that shadow zone while the roll presents the missiles with your aircraft's minimum signature profile. In the command center, General Drake watched the tactical display with the focused intensity of someone whose understanding of advanced flight operations was being expanded in real time. Rivera's instructions seemed to contradict established doctrine, but her technical analysis had already proven accurate in ways that conventional wisdom couldn't explain. Major Rivera, Drake said while monitoring Cross's situation, explain. To me, how reducing power and climbing increases survivability against incoming missiles. Rivera's explanation came while she continued to track Cross's aircraft and the converging missiles with mathematical precision that demonstrated understanding of atmospheric physics and stealth technology far beyond normal pilot training. Sir, the electromagnetic conditions at that specific altitude create a null zone in radar coverage. The power reduction drops Shadow 2's thermal signature below detection thresholds, while the climb angle exploits atmospheric refraction that bends radar waves around the aircraft. Colonel Sterling, studying the same tactical displays, felt her professional education being challenged by concepts that hadn't been included in any training program she had experienced. Major, where did these procedures come from? I've never seen anything like this in standard flight doctrine. Colonel, the Phantom Fade was developed during Project Nightfall after we lost 3 aircraft and pilots to similar air defense systems, Rivera explained while maintaining her focus on Cross's desperate situation. The maneuver exploits specific interactions between atmospheric conditions and stealth characteristics that only become apparent under combat conditions that most pilots never survive long enough to understand. Back in the cockpit of Shadow 2, Cross made the decision that would either validate Rivera's expertise or confirm his own destruction. Fighting against every trained instinct, he reduced power while pitching into a climb and rolling to starboard, feeling his aircraft slow and become more vulnerable just as pursuing missiles reached terminal approach phase. Executing the Phantom Fade, Cross transmitted, his voice carrying the weight of someone committing completely to procedures he didn't understand. Rivera, if this gets me killed, I'm going to haunt you for the rest of eternity. Rivera's response came with the steady confidence of someone who had guided other pilots through similar maneuvers during the most classified flying in Air Force history. Colonel, maintain that attitude and power setting for exactly 12 more seconds. Then I need you to execute a snap roll to port while simultaneously firewall the throttles and pitch into a 40-degree dive. The second phase of Rivera's instructions seemed even more suicidal than the first. Diving toward the ground while incoming missiles were approaching would eliminate any chance of recovery if the maneuver failed. But Cross found himself trusting expertise that had already proven accurate under impossible conditions. In his underground command bunker, Colonel Victor Petrov watched with growing concern as the American stealth bomber began executing maneuvers that his intelligence analysts had never seen before. The radar tracking that had been providing continuous target acquisition suddenly became intermittent as Shadow 2 seemed to fade in and out of detectability in ways that challenged his systems capabilities. What is that aircraft doing? Petrov demanded from his senior radar operator, studying displays that showed the American bomber performing maneuvers that didn't match any known evasive procedures. Our missiles are losing lock intermittently. How is their pilot exploiting our radar coverage in ways that our intelligence never predicted? Back at Thornfield, Rivera watched Cross's aircraft execute the Phantom Fade with the precision that demonstrated exceptional flying ability, even as she monitored the incoming missiles that were beginning to lose target acquisition due to the specific atmospheric and electromagnetic conditions she had learned to exploit during Project Nightfall's most dangerous test flights. Shadow 2, execute the dive phase now, Rivera transmitted as Cross reached the critical point where timing would determine survival. Full power dive to 27,000 feet while maintaining the port roll. The missiles will lose lock completely as you drop through the thermal layer. Cross pushed his aircraft into the prescribed dive with the total commitment of someone whose life depended on trusting expertise that challenged everything he thought he knew about defensive flying. Shadow 2 plummeted toward the Earth while pursuing missiles struggled to maintain tracking locks against an aircraft that was exploiting atmospheric conditions in ways that CONVENTIONAL radar systems couldn't accommodate. Missile lock indicators are going dark, Cross reported with amazement as he watched threat displays that had been solid red suddenly flicker and fade. "Rivera, whatever you just had me do, it's working. The missiles are losing track." Rivera's response carried the quiet satisfaction of someone whose knowledge had once again proven capable of achieving the impossible under conditions that would have killed less prepared pilots. "Colonel, you just exploited a combination of atmospheric refraction, electromagnetic nulling, and thermal masking that makes your aircraft essentially invisible." Back in the cockpit of Shadow 2, Cross made the decision that would either validate Rivera's expertise or confirm his own destruction. Fighting against every trained instinct, he reduced power while pitching into a climb and rolling to starboard, feeling his aircraft slow and become more vulnerable just as pursuing missiles reached terminal approach phase. "Executing the Phantom Fade," Cross transmitted, his voice carrying the weight of someone committing completely to procedures he didn't understand. "Rivera, if this gets me killed, I'm going to haunt you for the rest of eternity." Rivera's response came with the steady confidence of someone who had guided other pilots through similar maneuvers during the most classified flying in Air Force history. "Colonel, maintain that attitude and power setting for exactly 12 more seconds. Then I need you to execute a snap roll to port while simultaneously firewall the throttles and pitch into a 40-degree dive." The second phase of Rivera's instructions seemed even more suicidal than the first. Diving toward the ground while incoming missiles were approaching would eliminate any chance of recovery if the maneuver failed. But Cross found himself trusting expertise that had already proven accurate under impossible conditions. In his underground command bunker, Colonel Viktor Petrov watched with growing concern as the American stealth bomber began executing maneuvers that his intelligence analysts had never seen before. The radar tracking that had been providing continuous target acquisition suddenly became intermittent as Shadow 2 seemed to fade in and out of detectability in ways that challenged his system's capabilities. "What is that aircraft doing?" Petrov demanded from his senior radar operator, studying displays that showed the American bomber performing maneuvers that didn't match any known evasive procedures. "Our missiles are losing lock intermittently. How is their pilot exploiting our radar coverage in ways that our intelligence never predicted?" Back at Thornfield, Rivera watched Cross's aircraft execute the Phantom Fade with the precision that demonstrated exceptional flying ability, even as she monitored the incoming missiles that were beginning to lose target acquisition due to the specific atmospheric and electromagnetic conditions she had learned to exploit during Project Nightfall's most dangerous test flights. "Shadow 2, execute the dive phase now," Rivera transmitted as Cross reached the critical point where timing would determine survival. "Full power dive to 27,000 feet while maintaining the port roll. The missiles will lose lock completely as you drop through the thermal layer." Cross pushed his aircraft into the prescribed dive with the total commitment of someone whose life depended on trusting expertise that challenged everything he thought he knew about defensive flying. Shadow 2 plummeted toward the Earth while pursuing missiles struggled to maintain tracking locks against an aircraft that was exploiting atmospheric conditions in ways that CONVENTIONAL radar systems couldn't accommodate. "Missile lock indicators are going dark," Cross reported with amazement as he watched threat displays that had been solid red suddenly flicker and fade. "Rivera, whatever you just had me do, it's working. The missiles are losing track." Rivera's response carried the quiet satisfaction of someone whose knowledge had once again proven capable of achieving the impossible under conditions that would have killed less prepared pilots. "Colonel, you just exploited a combination of atmospheric refraction, electromagnetic nulling, and thermal masking that makes your aircraft essentially invisible to conventional tracking systems. Welcome to advanced stealth penetration flying." As the surface-to-air missiles lost target acquisition and began falling harmlessly toward the Earth, Cross found himself flying an aircraft that had suddenly regained its stealth characteristics through procedures that no training program had ever taught him. The woman he had dismissed as an overcautious maintenance technician had just saved his life, using knowledge that redefined his understanding of what was possible in military aviation. With the surface-to-air missiles falling harmlessly toward the Earth below, Colonel Cross found himself flying an aircraft that had suddenly regained its invisibility through procedures that challenged everything he had believed about stealth bomber operations. Shadow 2's threat detection systems showed clear skies for the first time in 20 minutes, and the electromagnetic signature readings that Rivera was monitoring from Thornfield confirmed that the Phantom Fade had restored the aircraft's stealth characteristics to optimal levels. Shadow 2, you are now invisible to enemy tracking systems, Rivera transmitted with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose expertise had once again proven capable of achieving the impossible. Your electromagnetic signature is back within stealth parameters, and you should be able to complete your mission without further detection. Cross checked his instruments with the amazement of someone discovering that his aircraft possessed capabilities he had never been taught to use. The stealth systems that had seemed compromised beyond recovery were now functioning at full effectiveness, and the atmospheric conditions that had previously made him vulnerable were being exploited to enhance his invisibility rather than compromise. Rivera, I don't understand how this is possible. Cross transmitted while adjusting his course toward the target facility. 20 minutes ago I was completely visible to enemy radar, and now I'm showing optimal stealth characteristics. What exactly did that maneuver accomplish? Rivera's explanation came with the technical precision of someone whose knowledge had been earned through the most dangerous flying in military aviation history. Colonel, the Phantom Fade exploited specific interactions between atmospheric moisture, electromagnetic refraction, and your aircraft's stealth coding to create what we call signature inversion. Colonel, Project Nightfall was tasked with developing capabilities to penetrate air defense systems that conventional stealth technology couldn't overcome, Rivera explained while monitoring his approach to the target. The techniques you're using were developed through test flights that claimed the lives of pilots who couldn't master procedures that challenged every principle of conventional flying. As Cross reached the target area, Rivera's guidance enabled him to approach the heavily fortified nuclear facility with complete invisibility, despite flying through the most sophisticated air defense network ever deployed. The electromagnetic signature masking she had taught him was so effective that enemy surveillance systems, SHOE, no indication of his presence, even as he prepared for weapons release. Target acquired, Cross reported as his bombing systems locked onto the underground facility that had been deemed impossible to attack with conventional stealth methods. Thanks to your procedures, I'm completely invisible to all defensive systems. Preparing for weapons release. Rivera monitored Cross's approach with the focused intensity of someone whose expertise was enabling the successful completion of a mission that had already claimed the lives of 3 exceptional pilots. Her knowledge of atmospheric exploitation and signature masking was proving capable of achieving penetration effectiveness that exceeded the most optimistic intelligence assessments. Shadow 2, you are cleared for weapons release, Rivera transmitted as Cross reached the optimal attack position. After weapon deployment, execute the egress procedures exactly as I described them. The atmospheric conditions that are currently masking your approach will change after ordnance release. Cross released his precision-guided munitions with the confidence of someone whose invisibility was so complete that defensive systems showed no awareness of his presence above one of their most critical strategic facilities. The weapons fell toward their target with the mathematical precision that only came from undetected approach and optimal release parameters. Weapons away, Cross reported as massive explosions erupted from the underground facility, confirming successful destruction of the nuclear research complex that had threatened global security. Direct hits on target. Mission accomplished. Rivera's response carried the quiet satisfaction of someone whose expertise had enabled the successful completion of an operation that military planners had considered nearly impossible. "Excellent work, Colonel. Now follow my egress instructions exactly. The hard part is getting you home safely." As Cross began his escape from hostile airspace, guided by Rivera's knowledge of stealth procedures that no enemy had encountered before, the command center at Thornfield erupted in congratulations for a mission success that had seemed impossible just hours earlier. The woman they had dismissed as a maintenance technician had not only saved their most experienced pilot's life, but had enabled the successful completion of one of the most strategically important missions in recent military history. General Drake approached Rivera with the formal recognition that her extraordinary expertise demanded. "Major Rivera, what you've accomplished tonight goes far beyond saving one pilot's life. You've demonstrated capabilities that could revolutionize our entire approach to stealth bomber operations." Rivera's response reflected both professional satisfaction and the weight of knowledge that had been hidden for far too long. "Sir, tonight proved that expertise doesn't always wear the expected uniform, and that the most valuable knowledge sometimes comes from the most unexpected sources." 3 hours after Shadow 2 touched down safely at Thornfield Air Base, Colonel Cross walked across the hangar floor toward Major Alexis Rivera with steps that carried the weight of someone whose entire understanding of military competence and professional hierarchy had been fundamentally altered by the night's events. The aircraft behind him bore scorch marks and stress indicators that testified to flying beyond normal operational limits, but it had returned intact with its mission, accomplished because of expertise he had dismissed for 18 months. "Major Rivera," Cross said formally as he approached, rendering the salute that military protocol required when addressing a superior officer, but his words carried emotional weight that went far beyond regulations. "I owe you my life, the success of this mission, and an apology for 18 months of disrespect based on assumptions that nearly got me killed." Rivera returned the salute with the same precision she had brought to every task during her time at Thornfield, but her expression reflected both professional satisfaction and human understanding of the growth that crisis often demanded from people. "Colonel Cross, your assumptions were reasonable based on the information available to you. The fault lies with the system that required me to work under false pretenses, rather than allowing my expertise to contribute openly to mission safety and success." General Drake, who had been observing the interaction from across the hangar, approached with the formal recognition that Rivera's extraordinary performance demanded. In his hands were the orders that would officially restore her rank and assign her to positions where her unique capabilities could be utilized effectively rather than hidden behind artificial cover requirements. "Major Rivera," Drake announced to the assembled personnel who had gathered to witness the conclusion of one of the most remarkable nights in Thornfield's operational history. "Effective immediately, your cover assignment is terminated. You are hereby designated as Chief of Advanced Flight Operations for the 94th Strategic Bomber Squadron, with responsibility for developing and training the procedures that you demonstrated tonight." The transformation in how Rivera was perceived by her colleagues was immediate and profound. Master Sergeant Rodriguez, who had worked beside her for 18 months, stepped forward with the amazement of someone whose worldview had been completely reorganized by revelation. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said with formal respect that reflected his new understanding of her true qualifications, "I've learned more about aircraft systems and maintenance excellence working with you than in 15 years of previous experience. Knowing what I know now, every recommendation you made was based on expertise that exceeded our entire squadron's combined knowledge." Technical Sergeant Murphy, who had often wondered about Rivera's unusual depth of technical knowledge, added her own perspective with the honest admission that military service sometimes demanded. "Major, there were so many times when your analysis identified problems that none of us could see, and we assumed you were being overcautious. Now I understand that you were seeing potential failures that our training had never taught us to recognize. Colonel Sterling, whose own understanding of advanced flight operations had been expanded by witnessing Rivera's capabilities, approached with both professional respect and strategic vision for how such expertise could enhance squadron effectiveness. Major Rivera, I'd like to discuss incorporating your advanced procedures into our standard training programs. Tonight proved that conventional stealth bomber doctrine is inadequate for the threats we're likely to face. Rivera's response reflected both willingness to share knowledge that had been artificially restricted and awareness of the complex security considerations that would shape how her expertise could be utilized. Colonel, the techniques demonstrated tonight represent just a fraction of the capabilities developed during Project Nightfall. With proper security protocols, we can significantly enhance our stealth penetration effectiveness while maintaining operational security. Staff Sergeant Chun, who had often worked maintenance shifts alongside Rivera, spoke with the perspective of someone who had witnessed exceptional competence without understanding its source. Ma'am, you spent 18 months working maintenance duties that were far below your actual capabilities. How did you maintain motivation while your real expertise was being wasted? Rivera's answer reflected the complex motivations that drove exceptional people to serve effectively regardless of recognition or appropriate utilization. Sergeant, every task contributed to mission success, and maintaining these aircraft properly was essential preparation for the night when this knowledge would be needed. The work was never wasted, it was preparation for the moment when conventional procedures would prove inadequate. Chief Master Sergeant Williams, whose responsibility for enlisted personnel management had given him insight into Rivera's exceptional qualities, stepped forward with the institutional perspective that her revelation demanded. Major, your performance over the past 18 months demonstrated leadership and technical excellence that influenced everyone who worked with you. The way you approached every task with precision and dedication set standards that elevated our entire maintenance operation. Cross, who had been listening to the tributes with growing appreciation for the extraordinary person he had worked beside unknowingly, added his own assessment of what Rivera's revelation meant for military aviation. Major, tonight you didn't just save my life, you demonstrated capabilities that could revolutionize how we approach the most challenging missions. Your expertise represents a strategic advantage that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. Rivera accepted the recognition with the quiet professionalism that had characterized all her work at Thornfield, but her response carried vision for how exceptional expertise could be better identified and utilized throughout military service. Colonel, tonight proved that competence doesn't always wear the expected uniform, and that the most valuable knowledge often comes from unexpected sources. Military effectiveness depends on recognizing excellence wherever it exists. General Drake concluded the formal recognition ceremony with orders that would ensure Rivera's expertise was properly utilized while maintaining necessary security protocols. Major Rivera, you will report directly to Strategic Air Command Headquarters next week to brief senior leadership on Project Nightfall procedures and their potential for broader implementation. Your knowledge represents a strategic asset that requires protection and proper utilization. As the crowd of personnel dispersed, many stopping to offer personal congratulations and expressions of respect, Rivera found herself reflecting on the transformation that a single night had brought to relationships and recognition that had been artificially constrained for 18 months. The expertise that had been hidden behind maintenance coveralls was now acknowledged as among the most valuable capabilities in modern military aviation. Cross approached Rivera one final time as she prepared to leave the hangar that had been her workplace during the most unusual assignment of her military career. Major, I have one last question that I need to ask. During all those months when I dismissed your technical recommendations and treated you as just another maintenance specialist, how did you maintain respect for the chain of command when you knew you were more qualified than the people giving you orders? Rivera's final response captured both the personal character that had sustained her through the most challenging assignment of her career and the broader lesson about recognizing worth beyond superficial indicators. Colonel, respect for others isn't based on their rank or position. It's based on recognizing that everyone contributes to mission success in ways that aren't always visible. Tonight proved that the most important expertise often comes from the people we least expect, working quietly in the background, waiting for the moment when their knowledge becomes essential. The woman they had called just a mechanic walked out of Hangar Delta 7 as Major Alexis Rivera, her true identity restored, and her exceptional expertise finally recognized. Behind her, she left a squadron of officers and enlisted personnel whose understanding of competence, hierarchy, and the value of every individual contribution had been permanently transformed by witnessing the emergence of extraordinary capability from the most unexpected source. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.